Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and welcome to the Friday Conversation, episode 81. And today we are thrilled to have author Michael J. Sullivan join us, along with Chris and Carl. So, Carl, will you start us off with introductions, please?
Yeah, I am Carl Albert. I am a self-published fantasy author currently in the latest Spiffbo. That's the self-published fantasy blog off. The name of my book is Truth of Crowns, and yeah, that's all that really matters about me. It's my entire personality now. I've committed to it.
So far, Carl. So far. The story's not yet written.
And Michael.
Oh, yeah, I get to go next? We're not going to go with
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Michael. You already introduced me kind of, so I don't have to go too much. But yeah, I'm a fantasy science fiction author. I can't say I'm a science fiction author because when I ever do that, my wife says, "No, you're not." I said, but I wrote a science fiction novel. She said, that doesn't count. It's only one. So I guess it does count. Anyways, so yes, I've been self-published, small press published, and traditionally published through New York. So I've done everything, and I don't regret any of it.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good way to start off. And Chris.
Yes, well, I have plenty of regrets, but we'll not take up the whole next couple of hours on that. My name's Chris Mohan, sometimes YouTuber, but mostly just like to hang out on other people's channels, geeking out and talking books and films and whatever else comes up.
Yeah. So, Michael, when I was preparing for this interview, I was scrolling through your bio and scrolling down your list of accomplishments, and I had to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling because it's a long list. But I think it's the first time we've had a New York Times bestselling author on the show. I think it's the first, so thank you for joining us.
So you don't even realize you're supposed to supply me with champagne, right?
Well, I did, but mail now, the transit's terrible, so I didn't think you'd get there in time.
We expect the best, caviar, champagne. I was supposed to have a limo. I didn't see a limo. I don't know what you guys are doing, but this is not acceptable. So next time you have someone, you have to think a little bit harder. You're not going to get any more. I mean, this is not. You're never going to get like Patrick Rothfuss or Mark Lawrence in here if you don't you got to do that extra mile.
I have to step my game up for sure. I have to get the caviar ready, the champagne, the driver. I have to get a driver that doesn't drink the night before. It's a whole thing. There's a lot of planning involved.
Yeah, could be a bike ride though in your case, Steve. Steve rides long bike rides, so meet you halfway and say, "Here, I've just found this. Thought I'd drop it off."
You go for long bike rides, Steve?
Yeah, I try and do about 60 miles.
What kind of bike?
What kind of bike? I have a like a gravel bike, like it's a Poseidon, and then I have it's a Poseidon X, and I have an evil offering mountain bike that I try not to kill myself on or hurt myself too badly. I have the scars to prove it, but yeah, that's.
You need to take your gravel bike out to Moab and try doing the trails out there. That'll kill you. Yeah, or it'll make you a man. One of the two. It's up to you.
Yeah, there's lots of trails here in the state that, can kill me, and I've taken some nasty spills. So I'm trying to not kill myself too soon. Have to.
Yeah, the rest of the audience probably can't see it, but his face is just smashed in from the many times.
Well, they know. Yeah, they know. They already know. But
it's the sexy voice that gets you by. That's
all I have going for me. That's it. That's it. I have nothing else. That's all I have to offer.
You suck, Steve. You suck, Steve. I only have my sexy voice. Like, what do the rest of us have? Nothing.
Well, for God's sakes, you're Irish. You're Irish. I mean, you have the accent. You can pick up any woman anywhere.
That's true.
Once people can understand me, get over that hurdle. That is true.
He does teaches. Well, I went to a book convention recently, and there was an Irish author there talking to me, and we were sitting in a group, and we were just chatting, and he left, and everyone else looked at me and said, "I have no idea what he just said." And I was like, "I've been talking to the guy for like half an hour. I understood every word he said." And I told Chris, "Thank you since we've been friends, I can understand what this author was saying, and no one else understood him but me." So it was a moment of accomplishment.
It doesn't really matter if it's an Irish author. It doesn't matter if you understood what they said. They just want to talk at you. It's fine. This will back me up on this.
Yeah, this is true. Like, it's no coincidence that somebody offers you the opportunity to talk, Michael. You say, "Yeah, absolutely. How long for 2 hours? That's fine. We'll just get warmed up."
Just don't ask them to sing, because then you're really going to be in the shit.
That's my father. That's my father.
That's your father. That's everyone's Irish father. Yes.
Yes, indeed. He's the type of person that goes up at a certain stage of the night to the DJ, and if the DJ has been doing some announcements and kind of saying, "Next up, we're gonna take it nice and slow," whatever, he'll just go up and grab the microphone and then just start singing.
Oh, don't invite them to a wedding. For God's sake. Doesn't matter what band you got, you have a whole new band.
You have a new band, indeed. American Pie. Oh my God, every time. Every wedding, christening, wake, funeral, anything. American Pie. One
American
song.
Pie.
The best thing for you, though, is that you're actually Irish and you're living in Ireland as opposed to being in America, where you're going to hear Irish eyes are smiling and come back again. I mean, it's embarrassing. But yes, if you're drunk enough, it doesn't matter.
It does exactly right. That is, get in the spirit, get in the flow. That's exactly.
I'm sorry, Steve. I keep feeling I'm just messing this whole thing
No,
up for you.
this is what we do. So no, you're fitting right in. Yeah, this is it. This is all we have to offer. We're done. Why American Pie, Chris? I'm curious. Why is that the song?
I think that, I mean, not to get too boring about it, but my dad worked, he was a plumber for many years, and he worked for many years when there wasn't as much work here. Another kind of Irish kind of stereotype fulfilled in Algeria. And when they were there, at the end of the night, there was no real entertainment, so they used to entertain each other, and they used to just basically sing all the time. And people liked him singing American Pie, apparently at the time. And he just sort of got asked for that again and again, and sort of became his trademark. Which
That's actually a really cute story.
Yeah, so his brother does I Left My Heart in San Francisco. Like, they both have a song each, you know, it's just one of those things.
Interesting.
It's a very serious endeavour, you know, there's a lot of chest action and stuff goes into it, you know, especially when the drink's been flowing for most of the night, you know.
Does the performance go up or down with the more alcohol consumed? Is it a scale?
Well, he gets to what we call a gulder. I don't know if anybody ever uses that word before, a gulder. So it's a really more of a large shout. It's an Irish colloquial phrase for a large shout. So it comes, the more drunk he gets, it comes more of a gulder than a song, so to speak. So there are bits that he really attacks, you know, and it's really a bit of a scream.
It's like back when they first started recording sound, they couldn't actually have a microphone, so you had to sing into the opening, and you had to really be an Al Jolson where you're just throwing your voice as hard as you can because you got to keep up with the trumpets. Yeah, we understand that.
Nice.
That's him. I'll do a recording sometime. Look, I'll send it to each of you. You can judge it on its merits.
I was looking forward to that.
Yeah, for sure.
But Carl, before we started, you mentioned that Michael had answered a question for you. What question was it that he answered for you?
Yeah, so I mean, for a little bit of more context, if anyone is not familiar, Michael is very I think widely known on this, particularly like Reddit, and you know, as just like a big helpful voice in the community, particularly with like self-publishing and getting started. And he and his wife, you know, it's you two who run the business, right?
What business? Yeah, it's us.
Your books, like all of that.
I write them, she promotes them. Yeah, that's the business.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
I have an army of people will write to me and say, "Oh my God, I have no idea who's going to read this. It's probably some funky intern." I'm like, "No, it's like me and my wife. That's it." So yes.
There you go. And they know their stuff, and they're always very responsive. And Michael, I believe, personally responded to a question I have. Honestly, at this point, I don't even remember what it was. It was probably something about where to put my book, like maybe go Kindle exclusive for the ebook, to get the KDP, like the Kindle. Oh my God, what is that thing called? I'm like having
Kindle
a huge
Limited.
brain fart.
I'm
Kindle
pretty sure
Unlimited,
your
yeah, to
message,
get those reads.
if I remember correctly, it was something about you were having problems with your love life and you were trying to figure out how to
Exactly.
control this. And it just evolved down to like writing, but yes.
Yeah, I was going to the sage atop his mountain for advice about how to move forward. It's really tough out here on the West Coast, I can tell you. Dating, oh man.
Do you think being a best-selling author will improve my relationship status? Yeah, something along those lines.
Oh, there was a great book. I forget what it was. It was like How to Write a Novel, in which the author was doing a satirical comment on writing, and one of the things was he was writing it with the intention of showing how he knew that writers were like rock stars, and that if you wrote a novel, you could get laid at any author signing. And I've not experienced that. But it was a great fantasy. I don't think it was a realistic, accurate portrayal.
I've definitely
Carl can
found
tell
the Stephen King approach of like being haunted by like demons and shit as an author is like much more true to life. Like
That's probably true, yeah.
What's the strangest question you've had, Michael? Like that someone came to you with? What's the strangest one you've had that sticks out?
The one you just asked. The strangest question I've ever been asked. Wow. Well, I recently did an interview with someone who was not. Okay, so whenever I go, okay, let's roll back just a little bit. You don't mind if I talk for a few minutes?
No, sorry. Here.
I always find it fascinating that when you watch television shows or interviews, and they have these Hollywood personalities, and they ask them a question, and they just go on with this wonderful antidote. And you're like, wow, did they have that prepared beforehand? And I thought they seem so intelligent because they know exactly what to say. And I realized afterwards, no, that's not the case. Because now that I've been doing this a while, it's the mere fact that people ask you the same questions over and over and over again, so that you already know the answers because you know every single question is coming your way. But I did do an interview recently where a woman was clearly trying to not be normal. And I think she was a psychologist. And she was asking really unusual questions, things along the lines of, if you were a tree, what would you be? It got to that level, and I'm like, okay, yeah, these are questions I have never encountered before. But it was just like, I'm trying to get into your psyche. I'm trying to figure out what kind of a person you are. I'm like, interesting.
Read the
But
books.
I'm not sure how practical this would be for anyone actually watching. But yeah, those were the kind of, that was the weirdest, strangest ones. But no, nothing has been unusual if you're talking about something that has something to do with writing or anything of that nature. But yeah, I've been asked most questions that I can imagine. Almost every single person asks me the same things. So I'm curious, Steve, what's your next question?
Well, I have a list. But it's a funny thing you mentioned that, because I try to add in the usual mainstays, because someone who's not familiar with you, it may be the only time they hear from you. So I try to squeeze those in, and then I try to squeeze in. I think the more interesting questions come as follow-up questions to your answers. So that's usually where the most, I think, informative and fun questions come out. So, this is what it is.
I like how you're cutting out in your questions.
Yeah, so I'm about to ask you a question you've probably been asked like 1,000 times.
Those are the safe ones.
Yeah, so
it's like you're hitting it right into the strike.
Yeah, I got to start with, start off easy.
What do you got?
No, I was curious, with your fantasy series all taking place in the same universe, how do you keep track of everything? Or did you have it planned out? Do you have a big board with strings and paper clips and notepads and everything to keep track? Or how do you track everything?
Okay, so you may have noticed that there's someone else talking. That is Echo. Stop.
I knew it was going to be.
Somehow you managed to trigger my automatic intelligence there.
What's up, boys?
One more time. Could you just ask that question one more time? Because I was listening to that thing.
Okay.
Something to do with notebooks.
I'll try not to trigger your echo again. Okay, so my question was about your fantasy series. It's in the same universe, and it's the many books in the series. How do you keep track of the different characters, the different plot lines, different histories, different backgrounds that the reader never sees, all the world building you do on the side? How do you keep track of it all?
Okay. I was once asked this on a panel, and this was much earlier on, and I remember saying that I was jealous of George R. Martin because he has a wiki, and he literally has an army he can contact and ask him, did I ever use this character before? That was very nice. I actually have a wiki now, so that's disturbing, but I don't actually use it because I don't actually even know how to get into it. I just know it exists. How I do it is, okay, this is going to be bad for those who are only listening, but by a raise of hands, how many people here know about Scrivener? Oh, all three of you. Cool. Okay, so Scrivener, for those who don't know, is a writing tool. If you ever talk to any writer, you say, what do you use to write? 90% of the time, they're going to say what, guys?
Scrivener.
Word.
Everyone uses Word, which is not a writing tool. It's a business tool. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, it is also the Latin of writing, meaning that everyone uses it. So if you're going to interact with an editor, you're going to interact with an agent, they all use Word. So everyone tends to default to Word. But Word is not a very good writing tool. Scrivener is. Now, in Scrivener, what you have is you can you basically have one folder that has your manuscript, and then the rest of it is just research. What I use it for is in the research, I basically throw away the research folder, and I just fill that with separate folders that I have about my world. So I have characters, I have settings, I have countries, I have religions, I have monetary values. Literally everything I have ever invented goes into that research section, and it's hopefully highly organized. But what happens is when I finish writing a novel, I simply take the manuscript folder and I throw it away, and I put a new manuscript folder in, but I keep all the research there. So everything that I've ever made is still there. I have just recently, believe it or not, discovered that you can sort by ascending or descending order by letters. So I can put it in alphabetical order. Didn't know this for the longest time, believe it or not. So when I create a character, I literally have hundreds of characters. Now I can find them because I put them in alphabetical order, which is great. But the fact of the matter is that file just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's always there. I never lose it. And anytime I need to look for something, boom, it's right there. So I didn't realize this beforehand, and it would have been wonderful had I learned this from the very beginning so that this could have built up even more. So as a result of this, I have spent many, many hours doing nothing but puttering with my little world building, Scrivener file, adding characters, adding settings, doing research, inventing things I didn't even think I needed to, but it's all in there. Now, another thing I end up having to do, believe it or not, is I actually have to reread my own stuff. The good news is that it's on Audible. I don't know if you knew that. But I can literally sit, have a drink by the pool, and listen through my books, and I keep a notebook. And for those of you who can't see, but these guys can, I have this nice little handy-dandy notebook where every time I hear something that is said that I went, oh crap, I forgot about that, I'll write that down to remind myself. So I keep refreshing my memory of what the hell it is I wrote. Also, if for some reason I cannot for the life of me remember something, or I don't know if I did or didn't do something, and this actually came up recently, I can actually go on, there's a Discord site that's completely devoted to me. I believe it's called Ryra. And this was made by other people, and they invited me. I don't think they thought I would actually come, but I did, and I didn't leave, which I think is probably disturbing them to some degree. But they made me my own room. It says Ask Michael at the bottom. And so anyone can come in there and ask me a question. I usually respond to it. But they will argue about the most minute, ridiculous comments. I mean, if you've ever seen like Galaxy Quest where the guy says, well, in episode 34, that's the kind of arguments they have. But the fact of the matter is that they will, the best part about it is that when they actually find a legitimate mistake I made, they will argue and rationalize why it wasn't a mistake. And they will take the rationality to extreme lengths. So the thing of like, well, if you break down physics to the molecular level, it's possible. I'm like, way to go, guys. But so if I have to, I can literally ask them a question, and they will come back, and they will give me usually, at least they will give me what the reader's response would be. And so I like, does this character have this ability? And they're like, I don't know. And they'll come back and they'll say, actually, in this here, it suggests they do. I'm like, okay, so that's pretty much what my reader base understands, so I can work with that. But yeah, so I keep track of everything because I keep it in lists. I keep it in my research folder. Knowing that you can keep trading out the manuscript and keep the research there is a huge benefit. I mean, like I will look up lists of names. I will have lists of architecture. I will have lists of plants and animals that I might need by region. It's all in there, and I can get it at a fingertip. And then this is the best part, guys. In case you haven't noticed, there's this incredible invention. It's called the internet. And you can look things up. And it's amazing. And I know you're laughing right now, but when I started writing, there wasn't an internet. So when I wanted to find out something, I had to go to the library. I was living in northern Vermont at the time. It took 2.5 hours to get to the nearest library. That was tough. So count yourself lucky.
I think that's really interesting. Sorry, I was going to just say, I think it's really interesting that you can have a multi-pronged approach to your writing, Michael, insofar as you can be lying in bed one night, have an idea, and just stick it in your research and lore for some other time, to kind of park rather than kind of, oh, I'll have to remember to write about that tomorrow in such a longer form. But you can kind of have like almost like a library filing card to kind of say, you know, chronologically or otherwise that may happen in there, and you can kind of forget about it, come back to it later, and go, I could use that.
So
Carl?
I'm not sure if this is the most exciting spin-off of that, but I'm using Scrivener for the first time right now for book 2 in the series I'm working on. I had no idea that it had this like almost like Google Drive like component, which I mentioned Google Drive because that's what I currently use to keep track of all my world building nonsense and like ideas for, you know, the end game of the series and everything. You said it's available for like the files are available with every manuscript, so you can like just like click into it regardless of the file you're working on.
So, as you understand, you've seen it. On the left-hand side of the and the right-hand side of the screen is a word processor, which is a very good word processor. On the left-hand side of the screen is folders. So how I set it up is you have the manuscript folder, which is obviously where the book is. Inside that, you make another folder. That folder is your chapter. Inside that folder are documents. Each one of those documents is a scene. Very simple. Then you get down to the research folder, and it's Wild West down there. You can do whatever you want. You can literally drag files from the internet and drop them there. If you find something, you just drag it and drop it, and it becomes part of your research. Or you can do what I do. I make a folder for characters. Inside that, I just make a bunch of documents, which are characters, and I write what I need in there. It doesn't come with it. You have to build it. Now, granted, I've been doing this for a decade, so my file is pretty extravagant. So much so that now when I save my files, it takes a while. I don't know how many billions of megabytes it is, but it's huge. And I would be very upset if I lost it. So I do have to keep backing this up in random places just to make sure I never, I don't get a ransomware saying, we're going to erase your computer. I'm like, fine. I've got it in other places. Take the computer, I'll buy a new one. But the reality is that, yes, it's great in the respect that, and I mean, I could go on for hours and hours and hours talking about the various things, because what I actually have done is Scrivener is a tool. It's not, you don't use it in a specific way. It's like you can use a screwdriver to open a can. You don't have to use it just do screws. So same thing is true with Scrivener. But there are so many neat things that are hidden in it. And whenever I tell this to people who are unfamiliar with Scrivener, they just go agog, that there is a name generator. That you can click on it and you can say, I want to look up Finnish names and Spanish names. I want to know the surnames and I want them female. And it will generate those instantly. Wow. And if you don't like those, you click again and a whole new set will come up. So it's very convenient in that respect. This is what I'm saying. It's built for writers. And it can do all kinds of fun stuff like that. But yeah, it's you could go on and on for hours about that. But I'm not sure I have even gotten close to answering your question.
Well, I guess the only like the little thing I wanted to clarify is, do you have to recreate that whole like all the research, all the like character files, everything for every single manuscript, or does it transfer over?
No, what I'm saying is that I have a file. And in it, there's the manuscript that I'm writing, and then there's all the documentation. That's the research. I simply take the manuscript, which is in a folder, and I delete that, and I start a new one. So I'm still in the same file. That's what I'm saying. You never have to get rid of it. It's always there. So anything you've ever created will still be in the same file.
Oh. Very cool. Okay.
I might get you over your little mini writing slump at the moment, Carl.
Another thing that's important is that I also keep all my books in there. So what I do is I have a folder that says books. Inside that I have a series. Inside that I have all the books. The really wonderful thing about this is that if I want to look for, say, a name in a book, I click on it and I do a search on it. Fine. But what if I have no idea where this character was? I can click on the top of that branch, basically books, and I can do a search through everything I've ever written, and it will find it for me. Which is really convenient when your wife comes to you and says, I think you misspelled this name. And I say, no, I didn't, honey. She's like, but in some of your books you did. I can click on that, type that in, and when it goes blip, meaning that it has found nothing, I'm like, this has never been in any book I've ever written. Which has actually solved some arguments.
Scrivener sounds worth the investment.
Yeah.
Next question.
Do you avoid you? Because I know some authors avoid using things like Google Drive because they're afraid of there's privacy concerns or things like that. Do you avoid using some things?
No, as far as I understand, Google Drive is really good at collaborative measures. I know there are a couple of people who have used it when they're working with another author, and because you can work with it live and both who can access the same document. And I've actually known some people, Joe Conrath and I forget his friend's name, did a television show recently. They will be working on a book together, and one person will write a sentence, and as they're writing it, the other person is editing it behind them, which is like my worst nightmare. So I would never want to do that. But no, I don't avoid it because of the fact that it is unsecure. I simply have found I wrote most of my early books with Word because that's all I knew, because I was working on a Windows machine. When I made enough money, I said to myself, I'm going to get a Mac, and I did. And so I got a very top-of-the-line Mac, and that's where Scrivener was king. So I got Scrivener, and I was unimpressed with it when it was ported to Windows, but they've improved it. And then I've got it on Mac, and I'm like, oh, this is even better. And once I learned, because you always see these pictures of people who have had Scrivener, and they look beautiful. I'm like, is this just a time sink? Is this people just wasting time and not actually writing anything? They're just putting pretty pictures and stuff together. But actually, it turns out that it's not. I mean, so like I will write in the mornings from like 6 a.m. until noon. Well, in the afternoon, sometimes I can actually just tinker with the file because it's not something I have to write. It's something I can just play with. And that's when I waste my time on that. But those wasted times actually matter later on when you're trying to look for something and it's at your fingertips. It's much better.
You'd also mentioned you've been writing since before the internet, so I wondered, you've been on in the industry for a long time. How has it changed? What are the for good and bad? What are the major changes you've seen over the years that you've noticed?
Well, the major changes have been ebook, audiobook, and now serialization seems to be popping up as something new, and Kickstarter. Those are the major changes in the industry. When I first started writing, everything was pretty much print. In fact, it was print. My first publisher refused to do an ebook because they felt it was going to cannibalize their print, and we completely ignored them, and we made an ebook anyway. But that's okay. We ended up getting the rights back from them anyway. But so that was the first revolutionary thing, was ebooks, which was fascinating. And print on demand was also pretty big. Shortly after that, and so of course, as you understand, ebooks became the big deal. All the publishers wanted the ebook rights because that became a very lucrative part of their industry. In fact, it pretty much replaced what used to be the old mass market paperback, the little things. Right. A lot of traditional publishers said, why do we need that if we have ebooks? It's even cheaper, and it's easier to distribute. So that kind of replaced that, and they still obviously make mass market, but for a lot of people, that's what they did as far as just you would have the trade paperback and the ebook, and that was it. Then audio came out, and for a long time, the traditional publishers were not interested in audio because it was crazy. Audiobooks were for basically blind people, and they cost a ridiculous amount of money, and you put them on CDs. It wasn't until, of course, that started to pick off, and we had things like the iPhones where you could put earbuds in and walk around and listen to it. You could listen to your cars. Suddenly that took off, and we didn't realize that until I think it was Audio or Audible did a promotion where they would give you $1 for every book you sold. We didn't even know about this. It was just like in the background. And one day we got this check, and it was for like $10,000. And we're like, whoa, this is interesting. Because I had sold my audio rights for my first books as a sub right to, it went from Orbit to Audible. Or actually Orbit to Recorded Books to Audible. So we weren't making a lot of money off the audio because it was being subrated out like that. But we managed to get a ridiculous, this ridiculous check came, and we're like, are we selling a lot in audiobooks? What the heck? And then as it went on, it turns out that the audio publishers were willing to give us way more money than the traditional publisher was willing to give us for all our rights. And all Audible wanted, or all the recorded audio books, all they wanted was the audio rights. But they would give us twice as much as New York would give us for everything. And we went, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So why would I go with them? So this is one of the reasons why I ended up stopping with traditional publishing, because I'm like, so I can make twice as much in advance selling just the audio rights, and I can keep the ebook and print rights myself. Wow. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I really can't afford to go with New York so much anymore. So we ended up selling our audio rights first, and then we would go to New York and say, do you still want it? And they did. For a while, and then I think someone in corporate on high made a blanket decision, because generally you'll notice that in traditional, if one company does it, all of them will eventually do it. That was the thing with the 30% or 25% for ebooks across the board, and now then they start doing it with audio rights. They have to have the audio rights. They're not going to sign you if you don't get print, audio, and ebook. And I can just get the audio rights and sell that to one person. So that was my traditional publishing, is when I would go with an audiobook, and then everything else I just keep myself, which is pretty much where I am now. But those are the major big and then the other one, of course, is Kickstarter. You may have heard of it. If you ever heard of the guy named Brandon Sanderson, it may have popped up on your radar there. But yeah, so we started that very early on. We had a fellow who, back in my early years, there were a number of authors who couldn't. They would get like one or two books through a traditional publisher, and then they didn't do well. So the publisher would not publish their last book, which just really kind of not only irked the author, but the fan base as well. So they would be like, what are we going to do? And I said, well, I come from a traditional, self-publishing background. I said, just self-publish it. And they're like, well, we can't afford it. I'd have to hire an editor and a cover artist, and we don't have the money for that. I said, well, kickstart it. And they go, no one knows who I am. They're not gonna. I'm not doing well enough to get another, book published through traditional. So how the hell am I going to get anyone to be interested in paying a Kickstarter? So unfortunately, they said that to my wife, and you never want to dare my wife. So she went up and she took the one we've established earlier, the one science fiction book that I wrote, who Orbit was not willing to publish, and she took that and decided to Kickstart it. And we were hoping, so we estimated it would cost about $6,000 to do it right. And we were hoping, well, if Kickstarter gave us $3,000 and we put in $3,000, we could put the book out well. So we asked for $3,000. I think we got somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000. I forget exactly the amount on that.
Wow.
And that's when we went, yeah, who knew? But the thing that was really shocking was that the vast, vast majority of the people who backed that Kickstarter had no idea who I was. But they did now. And that opened this whole new pocket, this whole new vein of potential people. And that's one thing we discovered, is that there are these different pockets of readers all over, and they congregate in different areas. They congregate on audiobooks. They congregate, on Amazon. They congregate in Kindle Unlimited, or in Royal Road, or on Kickstarter. They're just like fandoms, essentially. And there was Kickstarter fandoms that they just love backing really cool projects. So in this attempt to get money, or to prove that you could actually make money to produce a book, we opened up a whole door to new readers. And that was wonderful. So that's what we actually learned, is that it's not just a means of financing the production of a book, but it's a means of getting new readers. And that was one of the big discoveries we made.
It's so interesting, because I think of somebody like Zachary Gile, who I think a lot of people would consider to be one of the more successful self-pub fantasy authors around at the moment. But I think in terms of sales and about money he's made, in terms of going through KDP or otherwise, like, he's not rich off it or anything, but he put out a Kickstarter in a similar kind of idea of Anonymous, of his 3 books together, Michael. It was $130,000 Kickstarter for somebody that wasn't really making, and like that's a mad concept, that, doing an audiobook and doing all those other things, and then all of a sudden you get an audience, and a new audience, as you've said, put it all together, and you've got something that's very it's very profitable then,
Yeah, it's often misunderstood. People are thinking that you're investing in something, but really it's simply the concept of pre-orders. People are pre-ordering the book, which makes it possible for the author to print the right number of books. So they're not overprinting the way a traditional publisher would do, because they have no idea. They will invest so much money, they print up a bunch of books, and then sometimes they can't sell them all, which causes them all kinds of problems. But with a Kickstarter, they pre-buy the book. You have the money already. You just produce the book and hand it out, and it's just a great way of doing the same process, only in a fashion in which an author can do it, because they're not on the line for a huge amount of money, because the money comes first, and they already know that those sales are made. That's what makes it so attractive to most people. And like I said, I think that guy, that Sanderson fellow, I think he picked up on it. He ran with it.
He did all right out of it. Yeah.
He did okay. He did okay. He's all right. It was like his second try. It was like, maybe in the future he'll do a little better.
I'm curious, going off of all of that, where you see the industry generally going, if you have any predictions, and beyond that, do you think that more very successful traditionally published authors are going to look to self-publishing and Kickstarter, or do you think that's going to like you, Brandon Sanderson, the handful that have done it are going to like kind of stay a handful?
I have no idea why Brandon is still traditionally publishing. It makes no sense to me. He obviously has reasons, but I mean, with the amount of money he made off the Kickstarter, he clearly proved that he doesn't have to. Now, he may be doing it for convenience reasons. I've always assumed that Stephen King did it just because, like, I mean, if I didn't have my wife, I might just go traditional just because, just take the manuscript and put it out there. I don't care. I mean, you're not looking for the money. You're just looking for it getting out. You're looking to, feed your fan base because you like doing that. So that might be part of it. But he certainly doesn't need to do it for the money. He makes way more money doing it by Kickstarter because all that money is his. It's not being divided out in subsidiary rights. One of the things I do see in recently that's kind of cool is the new interest in making high quality print books. I don't know if you've noticed this, but particularly in the self-published realm, and some traditional publishers will go through like Subterranean Press and things that started it, but a lot of self-published authors are going the extra mile to make beautiful like leather or faux leather bound books that have sprayed edges and high quality, like ribbons in it, and they're just gorgeous books. And this is really appealing to the readers who like printed books, and that seems to be popping up a lot, which I find is fascinating. But as far as the future of what people are going to be doing, it's really hard to say. This is a question should be asked of my wife. She's the one who knows all this stuff. She's the guru of the business, and she can tell where things are going. Right now, she's investigating Royal Road as a new viable discovery section, because there's there's literally millions of readers in that area who, if you get noticed, will create a readership, and that's kind of unusual. Because right now, you may have heard of it, there's the progression fantasy and RPG fantasy that is very, very popular at this present time, because apparently people of your age have a tendency to remember having played games, and they like reading about it or watching it on Twitch. This appears to be a thing. And it's very popular, but the traditional publishers won't touch it. They just seem to be either unable to understand it, they don't understand that you can make money at it, but people are making a ridiculous amount of money at it. So those sort of things do very well through serial form. So things like Royal Road and others can create an enormous amount. I mean, there's people just killing it doing that. They're just putting it out for free. They have a Patreon account and people pay for it to get it, more, or then they kick it off and they do an Amazon finished book out of it, and people who didn't finish it on Royal Road will buy it there. So these are things that are just huge, and I don't know where the future is necessarily going, because I'm not smart like my wife. I just write books. But I do notice that the the high quality books seem to be very popular right now, and I like that trend. I like people are putting out a lot more effort, because when people first started traditionally self-publishing, they put out terrible books. Now the quality of a self-published book is exceeding that of a traditional publisher by quite a bit. They're doing a much better job, so that's really cool. Then you also have the other problem, which of course is artificial intelligence, which can cause all kinds of problems, particularly I feel for people in the KU realm, because if a lot of the people in the KU are making a living by writing very quickly and not putting a lot of effort in making a really great book that's going to create a fan base, but they're just feeding into the subscription model. And the problem with that is AI can do it much better and much faster. Right. So if one person is capable of writing a book a month, which many people are, you're going to have people who can do AI and they can write a book a day. And that's going to water that down. It could totally saturate that so that there's so many people in that pool that the amount of money people are making off of it could drop. That's where my real concern is for those writers. That could just totally water that down and just like make it so that it's no longer a viable way of making money, which is why we would suggest going somewhat old school, which is like getting a readership and then taking that readership and getting the names and the email addresses and then selling yourself on a website, so that if something happened to Amazon, if this did go bad, you could at least have a fan base that you could send out emails to, have a new book out, and you could make a living that way. But if you're completely locked into the subscription model where people don't really know who you are, they're just buying whatever's there, that could be really bad if AI takes over. I know, I just brought you all down. That's all.
But I think to pick up, and there's a lot you've said there, Michael, that obviously we could pick apart on. A couple of things I'll say. One, about the deluxe books. Interestingly, a lot of those are rebuys for people as well. They're not like first time reads, if you know what I mean. So it's actually people willing to invest in series and books that they enjoyed in a much more, mostly with the intention of actually never reading that really lovely version of the book to have sitting on the shelf and kind of use it as like a holder for memories or otherwise. But I think we've talked about this kind of over previous weeks, where the likes of Hollywood and big business are sort of becoming more and more risk averse, in terms of giving people a chance or taking chances on things, a bit like you said, risk-lit RPG, and in doing so are sort of like forcing people down and forcing new creatives down an avenue where they never go near them at all. They give them their chance and they kind of say, I'll do this by myself, and they'll miss that whole market essentially at a certain point. They'll pick up a couple, Travis Baldry, etc., and a couple of others, just etc., that are there that they picked up. But ultimately, a lot of people are very happy with the decision to go self-pub and stick for self-pub, going down the road and make their own path and their own decisions for themselves. So it's an interesting time, I think.
We're throwing it back to you, Steve.
Yeah. So I was how, and if you picked up a book that you weren't sure who, you didn't recognize the author's name, do you feel like you could tell the difference between a book that was written by AI and a book that was written by a person?
Interesting you to say that. So I do know an author friend who purposely went out and wrote a prompt to see how well it worked. And it's very, very good. Now, he also obviously has some skill in writing a prompt. And he said, write it in this style, write it with this point, and this is what I want you to do. And it did come out. It wasn't a matter of whether I could tell whether it was as good, say, as a written work. It was generally better. That's the scary part. For the average self-published author, it was significantly better in its just general prose. Now, it literally was a small portion. It wasn't a novel. So I have no idea how well it would do with a plot. And I don't know that it's even capable of doing that at this point. Everyone I know who's worked with it have said that basically they would do it in small portions, that they would, like a page or a paragraph or something, and they would have to just build it up that way. But so they're still creating the story. I don't think we're at a point at this time where AI can create an entire novel that's of any good quality. And but it's going out and it's taking as examples everything on the internet. So it's capable of regurgitating that which is already there, which unfortunately a lot of authors do already. Because there's so many authors who will read fantasy and try to recreate it and be like their idols, instead of setting that aside and creating something completely different. That's much more unusual. Most people, I remember when I was first starting out, there was writers who would ask me for help and they would send me this stuff, and I went, why is this so dark and miserable? Because, well, I'm trying to do like George R. Martin. I'm trying to give that. I'm like going, okay, but why? Like, why would you want to redo him? I mean, be you. And another fellow was writing a screenplay for a slasher movie, and I'm like, this is terrible. He goes, yeah, they're supposed to be. But I said, well, wouldn't you want to make the best one? He goes, no, they're supposed to be crappy. And I'm like, I don't understand the mentality. But that's kind of the concept, is that a lot of writers have a tendency to only read fantasy books and only read a certain kind of fantasy book, and then they want to write one of those, as opposed to, say, reading much more widely, reading, a variety of types of genres and concepts, and then extrapolating from that something completely original. They really do just regurgitate what they do, which is exactly what AI does, which is why when I saw this, I'm like, yeah, this is a lot like what I would imagine a real, fast independent writer would be writing. So that's why I consider this to be a really bad thing for your KUs if they're just churning them out very quickly. Now, obviously, there's people who don't do that. There's people who put some time and thought into it. But there are some people I know people who will put it out, a book a month, a book, like 8 books a year. They're doing this very quickly. And they're living book by book. And that's why they're doing it so fast. It's not like they're doing it for fun. They're doing it because that's what they have to do to make the money. But if they're doing it in that fashion and AI can do it better and quicker, then yeah, that's scary for them.
Yeah.
You made a really interesting point there about, and it's one I've heard before about, reading widely to find, unique avenues into stories, if we're talking about fantasy specifically, not to just, spew out the same old crap we've seen 1,000 times. And I wonder, I personally have found nonfiction to be a huge source of inspiration when writing fantasy. And I'm curious for you, what do you go to? Like, do you have, outside of the fantasy genre itself, where do you go for your inspiration, for your, research, for anything as you're developing and writing new novels?
Well, I rarely ever read fantasy. I read fantasy almost entirely because other fantasy authors have asked me to read their stuff for one reason or another.
Okay.
I mean, I do have a lot of friends who are fantasy, and they will say, could you read this? But so for the most part, I generally do read nonfiction, historical, not surprising. But I will also read anything that is generally different. Like I famously, sort of famously, for those of you who have actually read my stuff, there's one book in which called Death of Dulgath that I wrote, and I chronologized as I went through it how I wrote it so that I could give you a behind-the-scenes look of how I went about it. And the first step of that was my wife said, you have to do this in very quick time because of the contract. I had to get it out before the contract took effect. So I wrote it in 68 days. It's one of the faster books I wrote since the very early days. But the very first thing I did was the idea. I didn't have an idea. And what I was doing is I was watching Tom Cruise in the movie Jack Reacher. And it's not usually what you would think to be as source material for a high fantasy novel. But it was great because what I thought of was I was instantly invested in this storyline from the very first scene. And I went, that's the kind of fantasy novel I want to write. I want to write a fantasy novel that has a thriller pace that grips you instantly from the very first moment and then just keeps dragging you along with these ongoing manipulations that are just constantly saying you have to read. So that's a good example. It's not even a written thing. That's actually, it's just a movie that I went, this is a good source of how I can take that genre and put it in this genre and make something different. But for the most part, I mean, a lot of and I read classics. I like I said, I didn't send it to you. I'm getting my interviews mixed up now. But I mean, I read classics in the summer. I always pick a classic to read every summer. This happens to be A Passage to India. But I find something interesting in all of these that I can constantly add to my writing. But I generally don't read fantasy because it's too close to what I write.
Yeah.
It's too, meta. I'm not going to get involved in that. And it's just going to, like, oh, crap. Someone else thought of that. Now I can't use it. You don't want to do that. It's almost like reading fan fiction. It's like same thing. It's like you don't want to go near that because it could influence you in some way. But I mean, I tend to read. I have a great Susan Weiss-Bauer is great. She has a great series of history books that. The reason I love it is because I always like a broad history, like starting at the beginning of time, going all the way through. She has 3 of them. And it's the only history books I have ever read in my life that had me laughing out loud. She does amazing things with footnotes. I mean, she's talking about how the Scythians are just horrible people. They have face paint, and they're eating the blood of their friends and stuff like this. And they were always high on pot. And just like, that completely demolishes the idea that if you smoke pot, you're passive. She comes up with some really great stuff that are fascinating. But those are great ideas, and you can always. And the best thing about nonfiction is you can steal from it blatantly, and no one cares. So that's always fun.
And you had mentioned, with AI specifically, how does it concern you in general, and how far off do you think we are for AI to be capable of writing a whole novel and nobody know the difference?
I think we're still quite a ways away from that, because it's just going to pretty much take what's out there and redo it. Now, like I said, there's a lot of authors that are doing that, so yes, that is a possibility. And if you're not a discerning reader, because there's a lot of people who just love reading, it doesn't really matter how good the quality of the writing is, it's just something for them to read. So that's my concern. That's going to dilute that pile. Right now, I think the primary use of AI is, it does actually serve some really good purposes for writers. My wife has been using it, which is annoying to me. She'll say, "How could you write this sentence better?" Like, hey, but it's kind of annoying. But it does work really well if you're looking for a word and you can't figure it out. You can just ask it a more specific question than you could just by looking at a thesaurus. So it does help in those respects. Or if you're really having a struggling time with a specific sentence, you can say, how could this be done a little bit better? And it will give you some suggestions, which does get you over some humps. So it's, in that respect, it's not much different than a spelling correction thing. It just helps you with grammar. It helps you with other things. But as far as it actually making a great novel, I think that's probably quite some ways off at this point. But it certainly will help writers to be able to write a little bit better, a little bit faster. But the real concern is that people will exploit the concept and use it to just write bad novels, and it will be, competing with other bad novels.
Yeah. You had also mentioned about having your own website and a mailing list and a way to be in contact with your reader base without having someone in between. For someone who's just starting out, what would you give them? What tips would you give them to create that following, to create that reader base, to get their name out there without having to depend on Amazon or social media too much, to where they can have that list of emails, they can have direct contact? But how would you go about that if you were starting out now?
Well, it's pretty much the same way I always did it. And I once wrote a blog post on this, which is the answer that no one wants to hear, because everyone assumes that there's a secret that you can do that will promote that, and there isn't one. The blog post was entitled "Building a Beach One Grain of Sand at a Time." Mm-hmm. What I did was I wrote books, and then I handed them to people one at a time, and I asked them, please, whether you like it or not, leave a review anywhere, Goodreads, Amazon, whatever you want. That's it. And I did this over and over. I did signings at bookstores. I handed it to friends. I went to readers groups literally everywhere I could, conventions, handed it out. I had one person at a convention look at my book and they said, all right, I'll buy this. And I said, oh, really? What was it that convinced you? Was it my poetic prose? Was it my insight? Was it the plot? What was it? And they said, I read 3 pages and there wasn't a single misspelling. Big bar, big high bar. So, you know, and I literally did this over and over and over. And every single time I went to Amazon or I went to Goodreads, I would see the names of people I handed books to who did a review. They usually liked it. But one day, someone left a review who I had never talked to, who I had never given a book to. And I went, uh-oh, it's starting to happen. So the key here, and my wife would tell you this, the key to being successful at writing is, number one, and the most important thing you have to do, is write a really good book. And this, I feel, is the most overlooked aspect of writing. Because people will write a book and it won't sell, and they'll say, I don't understand. What am I doing wrong? Am I not promoting it enough? Do I not have enough interviews? Do I not have enough? What am I doing wrong? I'm like, your book sucks. Okay, let's face it. It's awful. Get another hobby. You're not good at it. No one tells you that, though, because they're all very supportive. But that's usually the case. When your book is good, you don't need a lot of promotion because other people will promote it. And there's an old thing that if you get, let's say, 10 people to read the book, maybe 3 of those people will then tell other people to read the book. If you get 100 people to read the book, you'll get one person who really, really loves the book and will start to tell other people a lot and will make it a point to get them to read the book. If you get 1,000 people to read your book, you'll get something called a super fan who believes it's their life's calling to make sure that everyone else on the planet reads you and considers you the best author in the world. Those are the ones you want because you don't pay them, but they will be the best ambassadors to readers in your entire life. So it's literally one grain of sand at a time. You hand people books until finally they start handing it to other people. If you wrote a good enough book and you put it into enough people's hands, they will start to suggest it to others. That's the best way. In my opinion, it's like the only way, unless there is another way. If you were to manage to get a major publisher to believe that you're the next best thing, they will push it so hard that even a really crappy book can sell. In fact, there's been at least one situation where they printed the book with New York Times best-selling author before the book came out because they also bought enough books to make sure that happened. Now, that is going above and beyond, but for the average author, that's a little out of reach. So write a really good book and then use social media. Social media is the best ROI you can get. You can get so much more bang for your time. If you go to conventions, you do anything else, you're not going to hit that many people. But if you go on any major site, Reddit, you go on Discord, you go on Goodreads. Goodreads is huge. It's the place where most readers go. If you go to these places and you promote your book without promoting it, you don't actually want to go buy my book. That's a really bad way of doing it. You want to become part of the community, and you want people to discover you're a writer, and then they will support you. And if you do that, then if you have a good book, they will start talking to others, and it'll start picking up. But yeah, it's not a matter of a method or a technique or any kind of marketing that's really going to work for you. It really is for the long run. You can run ads and it might boost you for a while, but if you really want to have a long run where you can write 5-10 novels and live off that for the rest of your life, you have to write good books. You have to get into a handful of people, and those people have to be able to spread the word. And by the way, when I say a good book, the definition of a good book is very simple. It's the kind of book that when one person reads it, they want to tell other people to read that book or give that book to them. That's the definition of a good book. It's not how much it sells necessarily. It's not how good of reviews you got. It's not how many awards you got. It's if a person reads it and they give it to others and say, you have to read this book because it's great. That's a good book.
Great advice.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not the answer most people would want to hear, but it's, yeah.
No, because it's hard as
Yeah.
hell, and it takes forever.
Yeah.
I think, one of the big things that I knew going in, but it's definitely been like hammered home. I mean, it's only been a little over 3 months now since my book came out, but you just have to be patient. And, and it's gratifying, it may be, months later, but seeing the reviews start to come in, seeing people actually start to respond, you're an unknown quantity, and you just have to give them the chance. And like you said, if it's a good book, if it attracts, if people like it, they will talk about it, and they will go out of their way to review it and tell people about it. And
something else you should obviously keep in mind. Number one, interact with your readers. Show them that you care about their opinions and their thoughts. Let them, tell them thank you, because they're the ones paying your bills. So it's appropriate.
Yeah.
The other thing is that if anyone gives you a bad review, do one of two things. Either do not respond at all. The other is to thank them for giving a review at all. That will usually show that you can take being ridiculed and that you're not an asshole. But if you come out and you attack them, if you get defensive, that's pretty much signing a death warrant to your entire career. So don't do that.
Great advice.
What are your feelings on responding to positive reviews? Because I know some people are of the mind that you should never respond at all, no matter what the review says. You should stay in your lane and not get in this lane. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's see. I initially I didn't really respond to reviews one way or the other. And when you say good review, that's somewhat subjective. I've had reviews that totally trashed my books that were good reviews. And I've had reviews that just lauded my books that were awful reviews. Just because of how they wrote it. I mean, if someone comes back and said, "Oh, I loved your books," and it's for all the wrong reasons, it's kind of demoralizing. And if someone comes back and it has really good critical analysis and they didn't like it, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's actually a really good review. I'm not happy with it, but yeah, you did a good job. So that kind of response is fine. I mean, if you can separate your ego from what the person's doing, that's totally understandable. If you can understand that people, I mean, there are some people out there who are just purposely attack people for the purpose of making a splash and getting likes or whatever it is. So yeah, you have to deal with those. But those ones just stay away from. My wife would often comment on things where she would say, thanks for making a review at all, just because, that was good. And it usually worked well. And oftentimes people would have specific reasons they didn't like my books. And I could go on and say, okay, good point, but there was this and this and this. I didn't know if you noticed. And they would, I didn't notice that. No, thank you if you're kind and considerate and don't take offense, you can really turn someone around. And I've done that many, many, many times, where if you treat people not like, "Oh, you jerk," and you come back and say, "Okay, good point, but I just wanted to point this out. Is that okay?" And if you're nice to them, they'll understand it. Like, "Oh, I didn't even know you'd see this. Oh, crap." and it's all okay. But you can actually turn bad reviews into good reviews pretty quickly. It was one thing we did one time back when I had an advertising agency, when I was doing ads, and I did a really bad thing. I put the wrong phone number at the bottom of the ad. $20,000 ad, and they had the wrong phone number. Yeah. So what we did was we bought the phone number and rerouted it. And so when the client found out, and they're like, "It's the wrong phone number." I said, "Yeah, but it's still going to come to you." And because we did that, because we made the mistake and we took the effort, they became like a client for life. And that's the same kind of deal. If you own up to the mistakes you made, and try to be better and let people know that you're not hiding these things, and you just treat people well, it comes through as authentic, and you'll be, you'll be someone who people will want to follow. I've had people who have supported Kickstarters of mine who have never read me, just because they've seen me doing stuff like this, because they like the person I am, or they like the mission I'm on, or they like why I write rather than what I write. It doesn't matter to them what I'm writing. They like the fact that I'm writing for this reason. And my wife has a big thing where she there's a guy named something Sinek, I forget his name, but he did a talk, TED talk, in which he explains that it's not what you're doing. In other words, if you made a washing machine that did a great job, you don't tell people you made a great washing machine. You tell them why you made the washing machine. And when you tell them why you do something, they get on board with that. Apple is a huge example of this. They get you behind the whole concept of it, not just the product itself. And I found that this is quite true. I mean, my whole reasoning when I was writing my books was I wanted to write something that didn't exist. And I explained why I didn't think that the books I wrote existed. I mean, my books are fast-paced, they're humorous, they're not silly, and they are written in contemporary American language, which is something I can't find, and I still can't find, which is really obnoxious because I wish people would imitate me to some degree that I could actually enjoy reading some of those books. But that's what I was looking for, and so I wrote that. And it's so funny because people say, "Oh, he's just writing the same old stuff that was written back in the '70s." I'm like, none of this was ever written this way before. So that's my why, because I wanted to read these types of stories and I wasn't finding them. And a lot of people responded to that, and they agree. And when you get people to agree with your mission, they're a lot more lenient, even if you don't do that great of a job, because they're like, yes, I'm rooting for you because you have a great vision of what I want to see happen as well.
So, going off your why you write, why do you continue to write in the Rhaenyra universe? What motivates you to constantly come back and explore more of the history, to flesh it out more, to explore new characters, rather than, a lot of authors go and decide, they get bored, they jump around, they create new universes. So what for you brings you back for more?
I have a very threatening wife. So when I finished the first original 6 books, I was done. I wasn't going to write anymore, and certainly not in this universe, and certainly probably not in fantasy, because like I said, I did. I wrote 13 novels before the first one got published. Almost none of them were fantasy. Like I said, I wrote science fiction, horror, anything you can think of. And fantasy was the last thing I was planning on writing. But because it resounded so well, it was selling fairly well, and because my wife fell in love with the characters, she was very upset. And we were going to lunch one day, and she said to me, she goes, "This really is awful." And I said, "What?" She goes, "You can go off and have fun with those characters anytime you want because they live in your head, but I can't." And I'm like, this is weird. This is a really weird thing. I'm like, my wife has a crush on one of my characters. I'm like, she's having an affair behind my back. So, she wanted more. And so, because I love her, I wrote some more books on the topic. And those were meant to be just one-offs, which is the Chronicles. I just was going to write, and I wasn't going to, don't plan to have any more of these, but I'm doing this because my wife really wants some more. Also because people had made accusations that the Rhaenyra revelations could never have happened. These two characters could never have found themselves and never gotten along. I'm like, okay, so I have to. All right. So, the challenge of that was part of it. But then, obviously everyone wanted a new series from me. And I could have gone with something completely different, and I considered it. But there was a problem. When I wrote my original series, I gave a backstory to the world and how it all came about and how the Empire came into existence. And it was a complete and total lie. And I knew it when I wrote it. In fact, I sent it to a friend. He's like, "This is the sappiest backstory I've ever seen." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Because it's not true. It's what would have happened over 3,000 years." You read about like Greek myths. They're not telling you what literally happened at the Battle of Troy. This is something that's been altered into a romantic form. So when I talk about this guy who's betrays his own people for the love of a woman, you're like, yeah, that's not really what happened. So I felt obligated to actually tell the real story because I didn't want people thinking, as my friend did, that that's what I thought the actual backstory was. But that required me to write 3 books, and I'm using visible quotes for people online or in audio to let you know that that's not what it became. But I intended to write 3 books in which I explained the history of the First Empire. The problem was, I assumed everyone would have read my first series, so they know how it turns out. So I could write those first 3 books to get to the point where you see how things are going to work out, and that would be enough. And then it hit me. And everyone's starting there. They're starting with this one. This is chronologically further back in time. And I went, oh crap, I can't end it without telling them how the war turns out. That would be really bad. I'm like, oh crap. So I've got to write 3 more books. Now imagine, if you're a writer, and I'm assuming a lot of you are, if you write a novel, a series of books, in which you plan this perfect story arc to complete in 3 books. It's gorgeous. It's going to end just right. And then you realize, you got to write 3 more. Like, oh crap. Okay, this is not cool. So I had to build 3 more and build a whole new story arc. So that's what I ended up having to do with that. Yeah, it was sort of a pain, and unfortunately I did it again. I completely lost track of the question that was asked of me. Carl, you asked the question. What was it? Do you remember?
Oh, it was just, why do you keep returning to the Raider universe?
Right.
What
So
brings you
that's
back?
why I did that. I went back and I had to explain that. And then, obviously, I had this 3,000-year-old history on this side, and then I had the Middle Ages, and I had the Bronze Era with the Battle of Troy and Homer. I needed to connect them. And I'm like, if I could just write the connection point, I'll have this really cool, huge, long storyline. So it was kind of a no-brainer. So I had to come up with like the Roman period. So in that time, I went with 3 books. And that I stole from Isaac Asimov. Because if you ever read Foundation, he writes this huge length of stories in the Foundation in which he has a story, then he jumps ahead in time, and you see how that affected this time, and then you jump ahead in time. And I went, what a great way of doing it. So I could tell the entire 1,000 years in 3 books based off of 3 people's lives, based in 3 separate, very important parts of history. So that's how I connected them. And then I was done. I assumed. And a lot of people were not happy with the fact that that's not enough. So now I have the famous, and I don't know if you guys follow me at all, but there's the famous exploratory commission to see if there is something I can do beyond that. Because I vowed never to go beyond Rider Revelations because it ended so perfectly. And I told everyone I can never write beyond that because it ended so wonderfully, unless, of course, I were to go back 3,000 years and write the beginning of the world and then connect the 2 of them together and had an ongoing larger story arc that I could then extend beyond the final one. If I were to do that, it's possible. And, of course, that's kind of what I ended up doing. So it's possible. But the problem with that is I have, 2-3 million words of a lot of stories and characters and events, and for me, I have to use all of them and make them all tie together as if I had planned it from the very beginning. That's a tall order. You were saying, how do I keep track of it? I not just have to keep track of it, I have to work them all together to make them all make sense, as if the whole thing worked from the beginning. And as you know, I have to write the whole thing first. In this case, not only do I have to write what might be a final series, but I also have to write other books in between to set up that final series, to add the foundational aspects. So I'm looking at writing 8-10 novels before I publish anything else. Yeah.
Wow.
That's why it gets really unpleasant. And when I just think about it, it makes my head hurt. But that's what I'm working on to see the viability of, can I do it? And if I can do it well enough. Because I don't want to have what's happened to me in other movies where you have this great beloved movie and then they add a sequel and you go, okay, that just ruined the whole thing for me. Yeah. Thank you very much. Now I can never read the original because I have that. So I don't want to do that. So that's where I am. Long answer to a short question.
A great answer, though.
Yeah. Another reason why I should never start writing. This just seems like an absolute stress ball of magnitudes which I can't even conceive of.
Oh, don't ever start writing because it is the worst job ever. First of all, you're your own boss. You keep whatever hours you want. You can do whatever you like. People pay you an enormous amount of money. No one's life is on the line. You can't harm anyone. And in addition to all that, people will write you daily and say, "Oh my God, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I know this is a huge inconvenience. Please, I want to apologize. I'm so sorry, but I just wanted to write to tell you that I think you're the greatest person who's ever existed. It sucks. Don't be a writer." It's just like tarring roofs or, laying asphalt.
Yes.
Same thing.
I feel your pain. I do.
You feel my pain.
9 or 10, huh? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, was there?
And it wouldn't be a big deal if I was Brandon Sanderson. And I don't mean that because he writes fast, because he writes big. But he is the same age right now that I was when I started.
Right.
And he's now looking at getting other authors to take over his Cosmere because he doesn't think he can finish all the books that he has planned. And I'm thinking, I'm turning 62 in a few days, and I'm like, I don't know if I can continue getting all these books done. And the worst thing I could think of would be get part way and end up like Robert Jordan and leave everyone, and I won't want to do that. So what would happen in that case? The books would never get published. So I could spend 10 years and have nothing to show for it, which would be bad.
Again, more pressure.
Not to mention, I don't even get to write what I was planning on writing, which is like, science fiction and
Science
other
fiction.
genres that I think would be really cool. Never got into those. Yeah.
Not allowed. The boss says no.
Yeah.
So what if you were to write more science fiction, what specific subgenre, like are there specific ones, space opera, near future, what interests you?
Well, the one I did write was born from the concept. I tend to write more traditional science fiction rather than space opera. The one that I was writing was kind of, I had a bunch of people, I read Brave New World, and we read it not that long ago, and it was part of a reading group. And the weird thing was that it was supposed to be a dystopian future, but the modern reader is like, that's not such a bad future. It's not so horrible. I'm not sure what he was upset about. And I started thinking about that. It was kind of weird. And then I started talking with like my family who were older than I am, and they were of the opinion that like the past was great, the present is awful, and the future is going to be worse. And I went, what a very pessimistic, awful view. And old science fiction always saw the future as usually being better, not necessarily negative. So it started making me wonder what would happen if someone from present day went into the future and they found that the future had solved all the problems that we have today, all the things that we would think you'd want, like no more war, no more sexism, no more racism, no more class problems, no problems with finances, no rich and poor, no differences to have to be concerned about, no one has to work. All those things would be solved. But to do that, what would you sacrifice? What would need to be sacrificed? And what would a person from present day think about that? For a good example, let's say in order to get war, you had to get rid of countries. Mm-hmm. What about a person who's very patriotic? They could find that as a huge negative. What if you had to get rid of religion? Would that be something that people would be on board with? So it just would be interesting to say, if we were to give you the future everyone says they want, would you see it as a utopia or a dystopia? Mm-hmm. So this became a Rorschach test that I was creating. And I tried to do it as balanced as I could. And I took a person from present day and threw him into the, several years in the future in which all this happened. And I explained how it happened and how it worked out. And it's interesting that when people read that book, I get such a total spectrum of responses, because so many people will look at it and say, that is a horrible future. And other people like, I want to live there. That is my dream world. So it's just fascinating that when people read that book, it tells me a lot more about who they are rather than what my book's about. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what interests me in science fiction. And I wrote several really good science fiction novels that I would probably want to revisit that were kind of cool, and try and rebuild some of those. But there's just some really cool ideas I've come up with, because science fiction is a great place to just like play with really cool, nifty ideas, because you can take the real world and extrapolate from it. Whereas in fantasy, you can't do that. I can't use common relations. Like I can't talk about, he was as, you know, as fast as a bullet. You can't do that because that's something everyone knows about, but it doesn't work in a fantasy book. So you can't do that. And I'm really good at that sort of wild relationship pattern thing when I'm doing descriptions, but I can't use that in a fantasy unless I build the fantasy world first, and then I can relate to what I've already created. But it's not as much fun because you don't get the common thought that you can pull off. But now the other downside to this, of course, is the fact that I realize I'm getting too old, and my personal experience doesn't relate as well with the mainstream reader. So if I'm pulling references to All in the Family, people are going, "What?" So it's like, okay, so maybe staying in fantasy might be okay. It might because it's timeless. And I remember Stephen King was saying that there were these great writers who sold millions of copies of their books in the 1800s, but no one knows who they are anymore. Although you know who Peter Pan is and you know who Alice in Wonderland is, and Wizard of Oz. These are things that people, because it's timeless. You can read them today just as well as back then. It doesn't matter. But you can't read a book that was written in the 1960s because it's out of date now and it seems weird. So yeah, there's a certain benefit. I mean, I did a lot of things by accident. I accidentally didn't put profanity in my books. I accidentally didn't put a lot of sex or graphic violence in my books. I did it just because it didn't help me with the plot. And I happen to write in fantasy. And all those things made my audience be everything from like 11-year-olds to 90-year-olds. And I also, it doesn't matter what year we're in. It will still work. So there's that. So if you're going to screw up like I did.
It's a good way to screw up.
Good advice.
Very good. For authors who are signing contracts or who have a book deal that they're considering, what would you recommend they look out for? As far as specifically rights, just rights for the future, because you had mentioned that earlier.
Wow. Yeah, that would be one that if my wife was here, you'd be here for hours. The one that she has a tendency to look out for most for is, what is it? I can't draw it to the top of my head. She'd yell at her. Hey, Robin, can you hear me? What should they look out for in contracts? She says that's not an easy question. What's the number one you hate most? The number one thing you hate most? Non-compete. That's what I'm trying to think of. The non-compete, and you can literally ruin an author's career. Because if it can state in a contract that says, if you cannot produce any other book that might compete with the book that you've sold them. And there's no description of why or what the classification is. So literally anything you write could technically be in competition with that. Now the problem is it's completely illegal because all contracts with major publishers are in New York, and the New York law basically states that you have a right to work. And a right to work means that when you do a non-compete, it has to be small in focus and in time. So if you had a job in some industry and you were to go to another company, they wouldn't want you to bring that information to them. So they might say you can't do that for 2 years, and it's about this specific thing that you know about. But literally the way it's written in most contracts of non-compete, and it's like in every contract that's out there, it states that you simply cannot write anything that could compete with your previous work without saying what that is. No one has ever taken them to court. They have used this, I think, in some instances to put pressure on people to not self-publish, not do ebooks, not to. In fact, there are certain authors I know who have gone and been afraid to, write in the same genre for fear that would be more, directly to that, and that's very bad. So, but you can get that out, and every agent you talk to will say, "Oh no, that's standard. You'll never get that out." We did. And it was interesting because I sold my books to Orbit, and they were very slow to negotiate. And as a result, they had edited the book, the cover art for the book, had the book almost all ready to go, and we still hadn't signed a contract. And I said, well, And because I was doing so well self-publishing, I didn't care, and they didn't believe that I would walk, but I let them know, yes, I will definitely walk unless you change this clause. And so they were able to define what competition meant, which was you have to have, like, I forget what it was, more than 5% of the same words. In other words, it had to be like 89% of the same words in that new piece would be in competition. I'm like, oh, I can live with that. Like, yes, we can do that. And it was funny because later on, another author who went from who was a traditional published author, he's like, I don't know what Sullivan's talking about. It was easy to get that, and he got the exact same thing worded exactly the same way that I did. So I was like, yes, we did that for you. And he's like, oh. But that's probably the number one, is to watch out for non-compete. And if that's if you're getting a traditionally published contract. If you're doing something else with, say, an audio publisher, you should expect it to only pertain to the audio, not to anything else. There are a number of people now who are trying to snatch up a lot of rights, and when they don't need to, because they're only producing the audio, but they also want to do the other stuff. And if they do the ebook, I mean, you can do that just as easily as they can, so they're not bringing you anything. So you should only sign away rights that you yourself cannot leverage. If it's something that you can do, don't give it to them. Now, if you're going to go with traditional and you understand that you're giving up all your rights for your entire life plus 70 years, yeah, then you can do that. But you're going to be giving that up. And I did that knowing that I didn't care, because I was going to write more books. And I was going to use that money that I gave up for those books was meant to make me a traditionally published author, open a lot of doors, get me a bigger fan base, which it did. Then I made money off of self-publishing later books. This was a calculated decision I made. But if you're a young author and you don't know what you're doing, make sure that you're not being sucked in by having them take rights that they don't need. Don't give them anything that they're not going to leverage. In other words, if you're going with the print publisher, and if it's a small print publisher, don't give them your audio rights. Keep that. Use it. But you have to use it. I mean, don't keep it if you're not going to use it. That would be dumb. Keep your ebook rights and then make an ebook, and that way you'll get the direct cost of it. So, but there's a lot of things in there, and if you really want to do that, you're going to have to watch a video with my wife, because she literally is a freaking expert in this. She's talked to lawyers. She's a legend, as they say in the industry, as far as that's concerned. But Robin Sullivan, wife of Michael J. Sullivan, you'll find a whole bunch.
Yes. And when you do finish a book, do you have a celebratory drink, or do you go out and celebrate in some way when you do finish a book?
Not usually. My wife does. When she finishes editing one of my books, we will then jump in the car and go to Virginia Beach, where we will spend a weekend. But no, I tend to finish a book and move on to the next. When I finished the first series, I was very, very excited. It was great, and I just fist pumped and walked around the house, and I was all alone. And I was just depressed because I knew no one was ever going to read that book. So that was depressing. So no, celebratory things, nah, I don't usually manage that, because you know what? I hate to say it, but literally every day I celebrate. I mean, I have happy hour cocktail at 5 o'clock just about every day. So, and I hang out at the pool, listen to great tunes, and yeah. And I have people who drop by who just boondocking, and they just hang out, and we do have fun.
Nice.
So, yeah, every day I live in a wonderful world, and this imaginary world, it's a fantasy, but then again, that's what I write about.
Sounds fitting. What's your favorite cocktail?
Right now, an old fashioned,
nice.
But it has to be made right. I have gotten into cocktails recently. I study their history and how to make most of them, and if you do the old-fashioned just right, it's a really good cocktail. Now, recently, I went to a number of very nice restaurants, and I ordered the cocktail. I ordered the old-fashioned, and one person, amazing, exactly right, perfect. The giant ice cube, the large, thick slice of orange, the bitters, it was perfect, and it came out with a nice cinnamon color with a Luxardo cherry. That's very important. But then went to a nice restaurant. No, it's like muddy brown with like shaved ice. I'm like, what are you thinking?
Shaved
Come on.
ice.
Yeah,
What?
no, it was just sad. But yeah, yeah. Right now, yeah, I would say the old fashioned is probably my favorite. Although I do make a pretty damn good Jimmy Buffett tribute margarita, which was important.
What that makes me curious. What, if any, of your hobbies have made their way into your books?
Well, a lot of them. People have often asked me, like, how do you know about the stuff? I was like, because I did it. First of all, people wonder how I know so much about horses and horseback riding, because I used to own a horse when I was younger, and I used to ride it all over the place. I used to go get milk at the grocery store. I mean, think about that. They actually had a little hitching post, and they couldn't believe because it was decorative, but they were like, what the heck? There's a horse. I also am an illustrator, and I started one of my first college courses, because I had a scholarship to an art school, was oil painting. And they were teaching terrible stuff. But there was an old man in the back of the room who just shared the space. And he was like an old master. He was amazing. And I just sat next to him, and he taught me how to do oil painting in the old-fashioned style of the masters. So when I was writing a book, the Dualgath, as a matter of fact, there's a painter doing a portrait. And I was able to discuss in great detail what he was using. Because I always like to inform readers as well as entertainment. With fantasy, it's like, oh, well, it's just a fantasy world. But I actually like to use real-life things, like how you dye cloth, how you card wool, how you forge a sword. These are things I actually research, or in some cases I actually have done, so I can actually put that in with some degree of logical explanation, so that people can actually learn things. And another thing I like to do is that when I write a cliche, I'm about to write a cliche, I'm like, oh, I can't write a cliche. But I can if I can find out the original cliche, because oftentimes cliches are changed over time and they're ruined. They don't make sense anymore. So I will actually explain the original version of the cliche, in which case not only am I using the cliche, but I'm explaining to you how it got wrong, and you should know this because you'll learn something from that. Yeah.
Oh.
That's how I use it.
Nice.
Very cool.
I've never done computer gaming, though. That's never been a thing, because, fantasy, medieval, not a lot of electricity.
You woke her up again. So I know you have to go grab dinner and have some cocktails with your friends, so I don't want to keep you too long, but there is a question I'd like to ask.
I have no friends.
Yeah.
You are my friend.
Oh, good. Good. I hope.
We're getting together later, right?
Yeah. I'm always up for an old fashioned or two or three.
I was just going to Dublin. I know a great pub over there.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of them.
There you go.
I was going to say there's a lot of them, indeed. Yeah.
So we'll meet up in Dublin, break out the caviar, the whole limousine experience.
I mean, this is growing legs. I like it.
Yeah. But one question I like to ask all my guests is, I think it's interesting what everyone's first job was. I think you learn a lot about someone and their life experiences sometimes shaped their first job. But what was your first job?
See, I thought your one question you're going to ask all your guests was, how does it feel to be as handsome as you are?
That was my second. I had to choose one or the other. So,
my first job? Well, my very first job would have been, paperboy. After that, I worked at a women's clothing store as the stock boy, which was an interesting sort of class thing, because all the young girls who were from my same school, high school, they came in all dressed to the nines because they were on the floor, and we were stuck in the back with t-shirts and jeans, where we were like the troglodytes who were kept just ordering boxes. So that was interesting. And then I went into I was a dishwasher at a fancy restaurant, and those kinds of things. Those were my first jobs. But my first career job would have been as a designer, illustrator for a software company, in which I realized my time was being wasted there, and that's when I realized I could start my own advertising agency.
Good lesson to learn.
It's because I had learned this fancy thing, like how to do art with the computer, and no one else knew how to do it at that time. I had to actually go to a printer and say, I want to give you computer files and have you print them. And they went, really? no one's ever done that. I said, yeah, we need to figure out how to do this. And we did. And I was one of the first people to start submitting electronic files to printers.
Wow.
But that was fun.
Nice. Well, we know you're very busy. Lots of old fashions to drink, but thank you for coming by and hanging out with us for a little bit. If anyone would like to find you or your work, where's the best place to connect with you?
Well, I think the website presently is www.ryura.com, and though that may change because my wife has some people working on that. Hopefully that's still working. Author.Sullivan, I think, is still on Twitter, or X as they call it now. And hopefully other people. It really, if you want to find me, just write Michael J. Sullivan into any Google browser. You'll find me.
Nice. And Carl, where can people find you?
Most social media at Carl D. Albert, and you can find my book on Amazon or wherever books are sold for the print copy.
Yes. And Chris?
You can find me I was going to say primarily on your channel, on your podcast, but I also have my own YouTube channel, which I occasionally upload to, which is just my name, which is Chris Mohan, where I talk about books and movies and storytelling in general.
Yes. Thank you again, everyone, for coming by and hanging out. Michael, thank you again for hanging out. Tell Robin that sorry we took you away from your afternoon for a couple hours.
That's all right. Thank you, guys, and come back again when you can stay longer and I can mix some drinks.
Yes, definitely. Don't tease us with a good time. Okay.
Remember to bring your swim
We
trunks.
will.
Or not. I mean, it's a secluded area.
There will be drinks, so yeah.
I just won't look.
Just close your eye. All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
See you later, guys.
Take care.
Right.